Well, Idahoans are about to decide on something that we're told will fundamentally change politics in the Gem State. Voters are being asked whether we want to open Idaho's primary elections and decide our general elections by way of ranked choice. Proposition 1, the voter initiative backed by Reclaim Idaho and even several former Republican state leaders, would get rid of the state's GOP closed primary and bring in a blanket primary where the top 4 winners, regardless of party, would advance to the general election. And there, the single winner would be decided by ranked choice voting. So we've broken this down several times here on the 208. Those in favor say it's a way to elect more representative leadership to avoid the extremes of either party, while the opposition tells us it would be confusing, costly, and ultimately untrustworthy.
I'll use the last example, right? They now have a Democrat congressman. They've never had one. And they're all going, hey, how did this happen? I didn't vote for the Democrat. It happened because they kept counting until they got to the end and got the Democrat to win. Maine's the same way. The Republican wins election night, the Democrat wins the next day.
As we pointed out before, that's not how either of those elections in either state played out. The leader, after the first round, ended up winning in both states. But to follow Speaker Moyle's lead, let's use Alaska as an example. The last frontier first voted in open primaries and ranked choice voting 4 years ago. A very similar process as the one Idaho is considering, with the top 4 from the primary going to the general election. But already there's a ballot measure to ditch it. So to check in to see what has transpired since 2020, we reached out to James Brooks, a reporter who has covered Alaska politics since 2016. He said 2022 was an odd year because, well, they had 2 ranked choice elections in just 5 months' time. One to fill the seat left by the untimely death of a congressman, the other, the November general election. So we started our conversation with, overall, what is the takeaway from 2 years ago?
Reaction was, it's mixed. If you're a conservative Republican, you don't like the system because open primaries disadvantage people to the extremes. There's not a far left in Alaska, as I'm presuming there's not in Idaho as well. And so if you're far right, you're the folks who are most disadvantaged by the system.
Alaska and Idaho are similar in the number of registered Democrats, but when it comes to registered Republicans, in recent years, because of the closed primary, Idaho's number has pulled presumably from the unaffiliated, while Alaska has remained dominantly undeclared.
Folks don't necessarily vote independently, but they're not willing to declare a party.
When this passed in 2020, it barely passed, by the way.
Yeah,
it was
less than 1 percentage point.
Less than 1%. What was the reason behind it, though? Why did people want this to happen?
Basically because they felt that the pre-existing system disadvantaged moderates. The idea was moderates were getting knocked out in primaries, and this encourages people to run towards the middle.
Did that happen in 2022? Was that kind of the course of the election, more moderate?
It was. We saw Sarah Palin, who was the Trump-endorsed candidate, who was considered the far-right candidate. She finished second, ultimately, but lost to Mary Peltola, the Democrat, who was considered a lot more moderate.
It also happened in the Senate race when moderate Republican Lisa Murkowski was reelected over the Trump-endorsed Kelly Tshibaka.
Now, it doesn't automatically mean that the moderate will win. In the governor's race, for example, we have a very conservative Republican governor. He won against a more moderate independent and a Democratic candidate that same year. Overall, then, after 2022, did everybody think it turned out well? If you won, you did. Before the election, Democrats were telling me, if ranked choice voting comes into place, we're never going to win another statewide race again because there's just too many Republicans, too many Republican-leaning independents. And then we saw the 2022 race, and that changed a lot of Democrats' minds. And Republicans, particularly conservative, hardline, far-right folks, saw themselves being losing races against more moderate Republicans. And so that really is the basis of support for the repeal effort this year.
Yes, after just one election cycle.
If you have 2 Republicans of equal likability, vote gets split out, the Democrat wins, then you're not representing the people of that community.
There is a repeal of ranked choice voting on Alaska's general election ballot next month.
It was sold to us as something that would create a bigger voter turnout. We've never had a worse turnout.
The case for the repeal, as best as I can make it, is that it is not fair. That parties should be allowed to pick their candidates, and that it should not be controlled by the state of Alaska.
By the voters. Okay. So then what's the case against the repeal?
The case against the repeal is the idea that voters should have more choice. And with ranked choice voting, there's less of a penalty if you have multiple candidates running.
Lastly, when we try to talk about this idea happening here in Idaho, people say, well, look what's happening in Alaska. That's why we shouldn't do it. When you hear that, what do you think?
I think that there's not enough evidence at this point. We have run this twice in 2022. We haven't seen significant changes in policy yet. We have seen moderate Republicans beating more conservative ones. We have seen a Democrat winning unusually, but we don't know yet whether those results will lead to changes in policy.
We also asked James about the other complaints with open primaries and ranked choice voting. For example, the complaint about having too many choices, that being too confusing. And it's true, Alaska's special primary in June of 2022 to replace the deceased congressman, they did have 48 candidates on one ballot, including Santa Claus, who's actually a real city councilman from North Pole, Alaska. But you only voted for one in that election, in that primary. And James said the lead up to the general election, it went back to a more reasonable 4. So what about the delay in results we've heard about with Alaska? How you don't know who the winner is until well after Election Day, leading many to suggest an opportunity for sabotage, a la the Speaker of the House from Idaho. Well, James reminded us that isn't a ranked choice tabulation thing. That can happen overnight, in fact, in a matter of hours. But it is an Alaska thing because the state is so large and many residents are overseas or even out to sea, they built in a 15-day window for ballots to be received post-Election Day, to make sure they all would be counted. So what are their forecasts for Alaska repealing RCV? Well, James told us it's too close to call. Back in June, the polls had the repeal ahead by 2 points. But 2 weeks ago, well, that flipped. So the enthusiasm was there in the beginning, but it has since tapered off. And that could have something to do with the influx of millions and millions of dollars into the vote no on the repeal campaign. Well, either way, in 12 days, we'll know how Idaho decides on ranked choice voting, and then 15 days after that, if it survives in Alaska.